Hey, good day. I'm going to do a quick little review of what we talked about today in social studies. Ted, have a seat, have a seat, have a seat, have a seat. So today's going to be listener questions. Quite like last time, we got some questions from the listeners. The young man over there, question.
What is imperialism?
So what is imperialism? Great question. Imperialism is essentially when countries look to dominate others economically, politically, and socially. And so during the age of imperialism, Europeans went to different parts of the world to try to control and dominate these places. Another question, another young man.
What is the scramble for Africa?
The scramble for Africa. Scramble for Africa was essentially when all these European nations met and they divided Africa among themselves, and they essentially got sections of Africa to control. The Germans, the British, the Portuguese. And this happens at the Berlin Conference when the Germans organized this meeting to separate Africa up.
What are its impacts?
What are its impacts? And I think you're asking what the impacts of the impacts of Scramble for Africa. Essentially, the Africans were not consulted, and this creates problems because what starts to happen is we have these countries being created with people that don't get along in the same place, and also they're fighting over scarce resources.
What is the transatlantic slave trade?
Transatlantic slave trade. Transatlantic slave trade was when Europeans went over to Africa and they took black people and they took them to the Americas and to work on these different plantations. And this was really unique because slavery's always existed. I mean, the transatlantic slave trade was much more violent and was the first time people were treated like property. This is called chattel slavery or cattel slavery. Young man.
What did the British do to control India?
What did the British do to control India? Oftentimes through education, they enforced British ideas, so Indians were not allowed to really speak their language, and they reinforced the caste system. So they essentially made sure that the Indians were divided, because if they're divided, they can't come together and they can't rebel. One more question. I think a couple more.
What were the legacies of the British in India?
The legacies of the British in India. Some of the legacies that we see is India gains independence quite late, and so essentially the development is hampered, and a lot of Indian customs essentially fall away, and we see this growth of British customs in life, such as tea and so on. And so I think that's it for today. Have a great day. Thanks for coming. See you later.